Hey everybody, it's Matt. Wrestling with Whiskey is back. Another episode of Straight Shooting, the podcast where I send my wrestle friends some whiskey, make them drink it blind, whether they like it or not, and tell me what they think in an unbiased opinion. And today we have a very special guest, one of the newest people I've met in my wrestling career, in my time over at Impact Wrestling, but he's not someone who is new to wrestling. Many of you know him from all the things he's done, especially at Impact Wrestling. And so I was also lucky enough to be on his podcast. He's doing a little bit of that stuff too. He gets to hang out with Lars Fredrickson though, so that's way cooler than, me hanging out in this empty room all alone with dozens of bottles of booze. Actually, it's okay for me too. So either way, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give a warm Wrestling with Whiskey welcome to the one, the only Mr. Canadian Destroyer himself, Petey Williams. Petey, what's going on, man?
Hey, I'll start it off like I start off my podcast all the time. How's she going, eh?
Oh, wow. Just put all the Canadian you can into that one.
I don't even say A anymore. That's so I'll talk to my family and they're like, hey, Petey. Well, they don't call me Petey first. Like, hey, Pete, how you doing? A. Everything's A. And you don't realize it until you leave Canada and you're like, everybody does say A. They've been making fun of me properly their entire life. So
I was just going to say, I'm like, it's one of those few like stereotypical things that just, it happens to turn out to be true.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we both work for Scott. He's always saying A.
Oh yeah.
And, is another one, like,
yes. Although that's not a uniquely Canadian thing. I feel like I said, well, I think I can say, currently.
I think it's the way we say, like it's our accent, like, like we just had, we just had another one I didn't realize until, because I haven't talked to her in many years and I haven't hung out with her in many years. We just had Angelina Love on our podcast. And then just every time she says out or about or house or whatever, you hear it. And I'm like, and I hear it. I've never heard that before and I've known her for 20 years. So it's amazing how when you leave the country, you pick up all these things that you used to do. And it's, I'm so Americanized now. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. No, well, we strip away anything that makes you who you are, ladies and gentlemen, and we just build you back into the American ideal. It's what we do. But no, thank you very much for taking a little bit of time and joining me on the show today. I appreciate that as always. We will, for anybody who's new to the show, we'll be sipping through 3 different whiskeys that I've sent to Petey blind as we chat and BS about wrestling and life and stuff. And at the end, he'll tell us what he liked the best, what he liked the least. And so I guess before we jump into some of the wrestle stuff, do you drink really much at all? If you do, is it wine? Is it beer? Is it tequila? If you're going to enjoy a drink on a weekend or something like that, what are you going for?
Yep. So this is my drinking history. So drinking age in Canada is 19 where I grew up. So, it starts a little bit before that. Everybody underage drinks, they can hang out with the group, whatever. And it was always beer. Okay. I mean, I tried the fruity, like mixed drinks, like screwdrivers, like orange juice and vodka at weddings and stuff. Like that was my first taste of alcohol and it gave me a stomachache. The sugar I can't do at all.
Yeah.
So, I would do the beer, but it was the domestic beer, like the Budweisers or just the domestic beer, the normal, I don't know if you call them pale ales or whatever, like just normal. So I didn't really like drinking, and I didn't like my first stint with Impact. I wasn't a drinker, like I just didn't like it at all. And it's just because I didn't find anything that I liked. And then just recently, probably I want to say in 2017, I was introduced to IPA beer, and I've never had it before. I went out one night with my wife at the time, and then I was like, oh, what is this Lagunitas? I'm like, I'll give it a shot, whatever, a happy anniversary type deal. And I'm like, wow, this is better than, I don't want to say it, but I'll say it. It's better than the regular Canadian beer, like the the OV or the like whatever, the Molson Canadian Blue. And then I grew to like IPA. I was like New Belgium was my favorite, like the Voodoo Ranger and all that kind of stuff. And then I actually just recently, I want to say this year, I kind of switched over to bourbon a little bit because Dennis, who that produces my podcast, he was like, hey, I got this what was it? Kentucky Mule, I think it's called. He's like, I want to make you a drink. I think you're really gonna like it. It's bourbon mixed with like the ginger beer.
Ginger
And
beer and lime.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
and I loved it. And I'm like, oh, cool. I wonder, I never really had. I probably had bourbon, but I never really, had it. And then I started. It was Bullet bourbon he had, and I was like, wow, this is really good. So that's kind of my drinking history. So when you said, hey, I got Wrestling with Whiskey podcast, I'm like, whiskey? We can drink whiskey? I'm like, sure. I'm newly introduced to this. I've tried out over the year several different whiskeys, just whatever I see on the shelf and stuff. And I'm like, wow, this is something I've been missing my entire life. So
Yeah.
that's my history. So now, current day, if I had to drink, it would either be some sort of IPA. I still like dabbling in the IPAs, or it would be like a bourbon, some sort of like a whiskey.
Okay. Do you have like a smaller budding collection at home? Do you have anything on the shelf bottle wise right now?
No. I mean, I
Okay.
don't like stock. Like it's usually I'll grab one that I can't even remember the names. Like I'll grab it. I'm like, oh, this is a fancy label. I'm like, or like the top is like,
Yeah.
oh, look
Yeah.
at that. That's wax melted on or something. Like it looks really fancy. I'm like, okay, I'll try this and I'll have it. And I'm like, oh, this tastes, different than this one. But I'd always turn to, for whatever reason, Bullet. And it's probably because that's the first one I was introduced to by Dennis. So that's the one I usually just, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. But and Bullet did a huge. They put it. There's a big. They put in a ton of money into like marketing and stuff several years ago. Like they really like maybe almost 10 years ago at this point. And especially they really did it into the bars and like cocktail like scene. Like so they didn't just shove it out there and be like, hey, just drink our stuff. And what they knew it wasn't going to be necessarily like a Jack Daniels, Jim Beam, everybody's grandpa just has a bottle of that sitting on their shelf kind of thing to drink. But they were like, all right, we're going to be the cocktail whiskey. And this was just when like American whiskey and bourbon was starting to get kind of really popular again because it had gone for a long time without really being the drink of choice. And so Bullet was for a lot of people, like a lot of people I've talked to on this show were like, that's the one I've had, or that's the one friends have given me and stuff like that. Cause they really made an effort to put themselves in bars. Like they were in the signature cocktail and like every college town and bar all over the country and everything. So it's not an uncommon story at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say like the Jack Daniels and the Jim Beams because growing up, even when I was underage, you hear commercials all the time like Jim Beam and whatever jingle they play, and same with like Jack Daniels. And in Canada, the whiskey that we manufactured over there was the Canadian Club, and right down the street where I was, like Hiram Walker's, that's who manufactured it and stuff. And I remember always driving by there, and I hated the smell because it smelled like. It didn't smell like whiskey. It smelled like this yeast or something, whatever it was.
Grain cooking or mashing and stuff. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. And so I'll usually skip when I see the Jim Beam or the Jack Daniels. I'll skip it because I'm like, this is a very popular one. Almost like, the beers. Same thing. I go back to the beers. I'm like, I'm not going to drink like a blue or anything like that. I'm going to go to an IPA I've never heard of just to see if I've experienced something that I haven't experienced before. And maybe it's something new I'll like, because that's when you usually like stumble backwards into things. You're like, oh, I wonder what this is. And it's almost like underground drinking, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It's like, like there is a little like contrarian part in us that likes to do that. Like we want to see what the next thing is. Everybody knows Miller. Everybody knows Coors, stuff like that. So, and that's another reason, kind of related to what's happened a lot with bourbon and whiskey. And I don't know if this was, I was going to ask you too, when you started getting into the IPAs, did you go down the rabbit hole at all of the craft beer, like in general, like all that stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't even remember all the names. Like I'll go to
so many.
If I go out to eat or whatever, and they give me the list of, the drinks, it's really awesome. They actually made a bar. No, it's not really a bar. It's a restaurant by my place. Cause they serve food and all that kind of stuff. And it's always packed. It was called World of Beer.
Oh,
it has me sold already. I'm like, I mean, they've shut down. They, kind of are named something else now, but they still have a ton of beer. So I would go there and I'd be like, all right. And they just have a long list of IPAs. So I won't just be like, okay, I know I like this one. Okay, I'm not going to go wrong with it, but I'm like, I want to try this one, and some of the names are ridiculous. And like and it's crazy. It seems like it's I don't know, like if you're an IPA lover and somebody knows that, it's almost like you bond. I remember being at the liquor store and I just picked up a 6-pack of the regular the New Belgium Voodoo Ranger, and I'm checking out, and one of the I don't know if you call him like a sponsor or the person that
like
goes
the brand rep or whatever.
Yes, the rep, and he kind of scared me because I checked out. He kind of gave me a nod, like, "Hey, what's up, man? Good beer," and I'm like, yeah, "Thanks, man." So, and then I leave and I'm getting in my car and he comes running out after me, and I mean, I don't like anybody running at me outside of a liquor store
parking lot. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm like, and he's like, "Hey, I'm a rep for New Belgium, like," and he gave me a free glass, and I'm like, "Cool." And I try to be like, "Hey, how to like, I want to rep you guys too. I love you guys' beer." And he's like, "Oh yeah, do this Instagram, social media, all that kind of stuff." So it was pretty cool that, people recognize that kind of thing. Like the rep was like, "Oh, he likes New Belgium, so he must be awesome," pretty much, right?
Yeah, essentially. That's your dude. That is a whole that is a whole rabbit hole in and of itself. But like, I totally get that. Even like there's like this thing, like when you're standing in the liquor store and like there's a guy, like you see what people are looking at, and there's a lot of, or like for us, for me, you hear what people ask for. This is a total level of like douchebaggery that I totally admit to, because like there's a couple like super sought after whiskeys that are super overrated and overhyped in my opinion, and so it's kind of a running joke. And you'll hear like, because I talk to liquor store owners who like they get like 40 calls a day for this or something, and it's perfectly okay whiskey that just got way overhyped recently. And so it's funny. I'll be looking at stuff, and like you hear some guy like, "Hey, do you have this?" It's called Blanton's. And he's like, "Do you have Blanton's?" And whatever. And like, there's this like, I've literally been in aisles where like I look down the aisle and the guy looks at me and we're just like, we have that like, oh, here goes another one. Like I don't like the word always either, but it's like there's marks in bourbon and whiskey too. There's people who just they fall into the hype and stuff like that, and it's just it is kind of funny how some of these things transfer into multiple avenues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wish I got in the bourbon game, like the whiskey game, a lot sooner. Like I feel like, because I'm old now, and I feel like I missed out on life. I could have experienced this a lot sooner when my body could actually took it more. You know what
Dude,
I mean?
that I have the same thing, because not only that, but because the industry, kind of like craft beer, it blew up so much that, just like what I was telling you about, but that's the case with so many different releases where like there's people who literally chase trucks and stand in line to clear the shelf the second something gets out, like, and then they go online and they flip it for 2, 3, 4, 6 times the value. And it's like, it's wild.
They do this with alcohol. Isn't that illegal? Like, don't you need a liquor license to sell alcohol? I guess in an establishment, but
I mean,
I see what you're doing there. Okay,
yeah, like no, this is talked about a lot in a different podcast, but yeah, there's a black market for bourbon.
That's ridiculous.
I mean, think about it. It's the same kind of thing where it's like, it's not the same thing, obviously, but like I remember talking to Cardona about it. I'm like, you can find like Reddit and Facebook groups and stuff like it for action figures, right? People may trade them or they sell them to each other. Like, oh yeah, I've got this rare Macho Man figure, saw it to you for $100 or whatever. And they do. I mean, yeah, it's a little more shady legally, but it's the same. People do the same thing with bourbon. They're like, hey, I got this bottle. Like they take a pic, and there's been ways to get around it because Facebook cracked down on it. So you had to stop putting like for sale, and we put it's now FS or ISO in search of, and you have to come up with all these acronyms so the Facebook algorithm doesn't find it and shut it down. And there's all these secondary markets and everything for it. So it's made being a fan like fun because it's very popular and it's in like the zeitgeist, but it's also very difficult because the things you want are sometimes hard to find. And I talk to friends all the time who have been in it for a while, and like 10 years ago, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of like Pappy Van Winkle. It's like, it's probably the most infamous like bourbon. It's this super rare, very old aged bourbon from this company, Buffalo Trace. And it's just, that is the definition of hype train. That people trade it for thousands of dollars and stuff like that. And you can never find it. 10 years ago, it was sitting on the shelf for $70. You know what I mean? Like pretty regularly. So it's wild.
Yeah, I had no idea like that. Okay, so first, black market, that sounds super illegal, but I mean, whatever. If you get around the algorithms of Facebook, I mean, more power to you. I just, it's just, I guess it's the rarity of it. Just like action figures, they're for sale at Walmart, but if you can't find a rare one, then you got to
Mhm.
pay a lot of money for it. So there's collectors and everything. That talking to Cardona, like I would
Yeah.
never collect. That's just me. Like
Yeah.
Lars is a huge collector of action figures and all that kind of stuff. And there's all sorts of people that are not me. I mean, I guess I don't have the time. The bourbon thing, though, that sounds more enticing because I feel like, I'm too old to play with toys, but I'm not too old to drink bourbon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you can be one of the hunters. You can be one of those guys tracking down liquor stores, bribing. There people bribe store owners to let them know when certain stuff drops and everything like that. Or
Oh, no.
it's wild.
So Johnny Bravo, who we work with, I mean,
Yep.
he's an interesting character that you should probably have on the podcast one time.
That's a good idea.
Don't know if he drinks or not, but his old shoot job, he was a manager at like a Toys R Us for like 20 years or something before they shut down all the Toys R Us's. And he pretty, I don't know if I should be saying this on the air, but he ran a racket, like not really. He would just hook up his friends, but
I'm sure.
like, they were like,
Mhm.
okay, yep, I got the new whatever McFarlane figures coming in. Every box has like the rare one in there. So he would put it aside because, he's a manager, and then so-and-so would come and purchase it for regular price. Right. But he'd put it aside for him, and then they could sell it for whatever. And maybe he would drop them some money. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I could see that happening, especially, man, I need to get a hookup at a liquor store. But there's probably already somebody extorting him. So I don't know if that would work.
There's always someone extorting. It's
Yeah.
who can out extort and everything like that. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, on that first note, let's go ahead. Let's have our first pour of the day.
All right.
Why not? Sample A. So we're gonna go ABC straight down the line. Go ahead and give it a little pour.
All right. I'm gonna pour it in my glass here.
Glass. Quick.
Okay. It smells like whiskey.
Yes, that's the first one. So yeah. So the first thing we do is go ahead, bring it up, give it a little. We look at the color, and then we just come up with the most douchebaggery thing for brown. A lot of people talk about color. I don't like talking about color in bourbon and American whiskey. It generally doesn't come up because they all look very, very similar. In Scotch, the variation can be wild because of different factors. But this is brown. So the next, you're going to take a smell. So you put your nose to the rim of the glass. Keep your mouth open. It'll cause a little bit less burn and a little bit more opening of your olfactories, and kind of give me some initial impressions.
Well, definitely. I mean, I don't know. It definitely smells like whiskey. I mean, it's hard to distinguish. Like,
so sometimes, like, is it number one? Is the alcohol punch very strong, or is it mild?
No. So mild. Yeah, thank you for that guidance. So I don't feel like it's very strong.
Okay.
Like initially, like when you said open your mouth so it doesn't burn, it wasn't burning with my mouth closed. So
that's good. Things like, does it seem like spicy or herbally? Like think of like baking spices you might put on a steak or put on a chicken or something like that. Pepper, things like that.
I mean, maybe
or sweet. It could be sweet too. Maybe it sounds almost sugary.
I mean, it does have a little bit of spice, but I would say it's not too hefty on that. I would say maybe it has some sugar in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, like there's grainy notes, or like sometimes even like leafy, like leather and tobacco are sometimes common notes in whiskey. Not that all of us know what the hell leather and tobacco tastes like, but these kind of like those kind of like bitter notes are the kind of things you might come across as well.
No, not very.
Okay.
Not very bitter.
Good to know. So take a sip. It's a small sip. You don't have to slug it back. Let it, especially this is the first one of the day, I assume. So that first sip, even if it's light, will probably give you a pretty nice kick. So just a small sip to kind of coat your tongue and get used to it before we really break it down. I always, a nice little warm up sip, swish it around, let it kind of go over your mouth and everything like that.
Okay. That one burns a little bit more.
Yeah.
So it really opens up the sinuses, I would say. Yeah. So it doesn't smell that strong.
but it tasted a little bit stronger than it smelled.
Yeah, I would say so. Maybe
Okay.
it's just the shocking first sip.
That's right. So now take another small sip and let it sit on your tongue, and now try to like see if you can taste anything. Like again, try to sweetness, woodiness, spicy, herbally, peppery, or sweet, sugary, brown sugar. Things think of things like that, candy bar, or anything like caramel, vanilla.
Oh, sorry.
Little kick.
I would. It tastes sweet. I'm trying
Okay.
to think of what that taste is. I don't know if you're just putting thoughts in my head.
Maybe.
The caramelly thing.
Sure.
I don't know why I'm tasting that right now. Maybe because I had a Twix earlier and it's knocking it out. I don't know. But it is something like candy-ish, I would say.
Okay.
That's where I don't know if I hit it on the head or not, or if I'm totally off base.
Again, there's no wrong answer.
I feel like my lips are a little sticky, so I want to say there's got to be some sort of like molassesy like type sugar in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing too that we sometimes think the last kind of component of a tasting is finish, right?
Okay.
So finish is usually how, and if you have to take one more little sip to think about it, it's kind of how it lingers, because sometimes things are very short. It goes in and it goes out and it's gone, in 5 seconds. Other ones, that spice is tingling and burning and stuff like that for 30, 40 seconds and staying with you for a while. Sometimes even the flavor changes after it dries out. Like, oh, sometimes I'll get like dried fruit on the roof of my mouth after letting it sit for a second.
Yeah.
So
I would
is
say
it quick? Is it medium? Is it long?
I would say it's quicker.
Okay.
But it stays in the nostril for a little bit longer. I would say. I don't know. It's going to be interesting when we compare it to the other ones, because the first one's always the toughest, I would say, because it's the first one out of the gate. But yeah, burning's gone. The aftertaste is still there.
Okay.
Like it's something. I don't know if that's like, maybe I'm thinking like leather or something, but
Okay.
that's what you think of when you think of like, whiskey and stuff.
Sure.
So, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
I like it. I like it.
All right. Well, good. So try to keep some of that a little bit in mind, and put that one to the side. And so then when we have the next ones as we go along, kind of think, oh yeah, how does this compare to sample A, so on and so forth.
Okay.
But before we do that, we would be remiss if we didn't get into a little bit of wrestle chat. And since you and I are relatively newly acquainted, I'm sure you've told stories similarly a bajillion times. But give me the elevator pitch, especially as someone who wrestles and everything myself. I always, give me the short version of like first is kind of how you kind of broke in, but also like I always like to hear you, as whether it was a kid or a young man or whatever, like, why pro wrestling? Of all the things we as humans can do, whether we're athletes, given the gifts you need to be a pro wrestler. I know, I agree. What was it about that particular art form, sport, whatever, that made you say, yep, that's got to be the one?
Yeah. So, man, I want to say I was 6 years old and I don't even remember. It was probably a VHS tape bought by my grandfather from the video store. And, he put it in, I don't even remember who was wrestling. I want to say it was like a King Kong Bundy and maybe somebody else. And immediately I was like, what is this? Like, this is very interesting. And then, just like snowball from there, like my dad would, watch wrestling as well. He was a fan, but he wasn't like a get up and shout like you hear like all our grandparents did. Like they would sit like ringside and shout at the TV or whatever the case may be. He wasn't that. He would sit there, have a beer or whatever, and just chill and watch the show. And I watched it with him and I loved it. And I fell in love with it. Like, Saturday morning watching WWE, obviously. And it was just, there was something about it. Like the characters were just so outrageous. I was a Hulkamaniac. Like everybody was, I feel like, he was the main baby face, and it was great. It was something I could relate to. They told very, very simple stories back then. Not like other sports where it's like, yeah, there's drama, but it depends on what your home team is. Right. So there was always that, like, like I'm a Tigers fan, Detroit Tigers, baseball games, right? If I see them play at a away game, I'm like, why is everybody booing the pitcher? You know, they're our home team. Like, it was weird. In wrestling, clear cut baby faces and heels, cheer and boo. There was no in between. And at the time, and I love that. I love them. Like, this is something I want to do. And I, you know, had the action figures, and, you know, I jumped off my bed and wrestled with my cousins and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of fell out of love with it when I was, you know, 12. I started getting into girls and stuff like that. And I had friends that were like, wrestling isn't cool.
I
And I'm
remember
like,
that stage.
yeah, you know, you're right. And then I got into music, and good thing, because, you know, I started playing guitar and did the bands and all that kind of stuff. And I probably fell out of it for a few years. And then all of a sudden, wrestling's cool again, because the Attitude Era. And then all my friends that said I was stupid for watching wrestling started liking wrestling. And then I just was like, I got caught up with everything I missed, and I fell back in love with it. And I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to do this. And then, yeah, 19-year-old me, I started training under Scott Demore. And, you know, Scott was very, very, very good trainer, because even though he wanted your money, like most trainers do, he was like, hey, man, I'm not really going to, you know, push you or pitch you to TV or anything like that. You got to finish your school. You got to finish your degree or your college or whatever the case may be, because you need something to fall back on. I've seen too many people, you know, go down that wrong road. So he was really good about that. And then as soon as I was done with school, you know, he saw that I was taking initiative and, you know, traveling everywhere to try to, you know, make a name for myself. And then that's when they had a pitch for Team Canada and TNA at the time. And Scott Demore's pitch to Uncle Jeff was, all right, well, I got an actual Canadian. And they're like, all right, you know, tell me about him. He's like, well, picture this. Imagine Buff Bagwell got put in a dryer and shrank a little bit, but when he came out, he learned how to work. And I was like, whoa. So, yeah. So, I mean, I did that for a little bit, and I had, I was put on the spot, a sink or swim spot, a few times at TNA in the early run, where they're like, hey, you got to be live on pay-per-view. We had a cancellation. You got 15 minutes to prepare, go. And I, you know, exceeded their expectations, I guess. And we did that for a couple months with Team Canada, and they signed us. And then I worked there for 5 years and just loved it ever since. And when I came back in 2017, Scott knew that I wanted to get into the production side of it. And I did at the time as well. Throughout it, I helped be the head coach at Scott's, you know, at the Can-Am Wrestling School. And so he was like, yeah, this guy's a bright kid. He has his shit together, and, you know, he knows what he's doing and stuff. And, you know, he kind of allowed me to, again, he was like, hey, he was a producer at the time. Uncle Jeff was, you know, still the owner. I think it might've been his last couple of weeks there. And Scott's like, hey, man, I'm too busy. Can you take this next match? And this could be like your agenting, your producing kind of, you know, tryout, I guess you could say. And I'm like, okay, cool. What's the match? He's like, oh, it's, you know, Desmond Xavier versus Matt Seidel. And I'm like, all right, when they up? Like a couple matches. He's like, oh, they're up in about 3 minutes. And I'm like, so I'm trying to get with them, like, guys, dives, all this kind of stuff. And, you know, I think Sahadi was doing the production at the time, the director, and he was like yelling at me, like, did you know about this dive? And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I missed it. But, you know, I made it. I did it. And they gave me the ball ever since. And I was just, I kind of polished myself off. Now you see me, I do both. I run around all day, and I agent in my wrestling gear, and then I put down my headset and, you know, do a run in, and then come back, and then call the break spot, whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You're the busiest damn person on, aside from maybe like just the production people just trying to like make everything happen. But yeah, it is so funny. Just you got the towel around your neck, like so wiping sweat off from the match before. Like, okay, guys, give me this match. Like, okay, what are we doing? It's a lot of respect. So wait, so that's pretty quick. How long did you from training to like Scott kind of saying, hey, let's try this out with TNA with Impact? Like, how quick of a process was that?
It was about 4 years, I would say.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was some time. Like, I think I was 23. 22 or 23 when I started with TNA. but when I was 19, I was still going to school, and I wasn't doing a lot of indie dates because I had full-time school, and I would do just some local stuff. Scott would run shows every few months or whatever, and then I would do stuff stateside. And I mean, it was illegal for me to work over in the US because I'm Canadian.
Mhm.
So we had to like sneak the gear across somehow, some way, whatever, right? Even when they gave me the X Division title in 2004, even though I was under contract, when they gave me the contract in June, they were still in the process of getting me my visa, and it wasn't finalized yet. And they gave me the title, and it was on its way. Like, they're rushing it. Like, I'm probably going to get it in a couple weeks. But I said I couldn't bring the X Division title home with me. I was still living in Canada, and I had to actually give it to Andrew Thomas, who used to be a producer director with us, and now he works for AEW, and he used to be the referee at the time. And I would give it to him. I'm like, hey, man, can you bring this to the next set of TVs? Because I don't have a visa. I can't carry and like
This
bring it.
giant belt.
They're like, what is this? And there was no replicas back then. Like, it was
Yeah.
and I got wrestling gear. It's just so, yeah, I didn't do much indies and stuff like that for the first few years. Like, I probably only had like, I don't know, 15 to 20 matches a year, but I was training at the school like 2 times a week for a couple hours and all that kind of stuff. And then once I was done school, that's when I made it a point. And Alex Shelley was, a big part of him getting me into like IWA Mid South with Ian Rotten and stuff like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
He was a favorite down there. And then, myself, Jimmy Jacobs, Alex Shelley, whoever, would drive down there like so many hours for like so little money. But, Ian was a big part of my career too, because at his show, it's the first time I ever did the Canadian Destroyer. And Ian, he doesn't wait on pushing people. He's like, oh, that kid's hot right now. Let's push him. And like within weeks, you're the champion. He does it all the time, but it gets people he was drawing well at the time. And Scott saw I was like making a name for myself. And that's when he was like, okay, this guy has some experience now. Maybe now I could pitch it. It's a long shot, but maybe I could pitch it to Uncle Jeff. And good thing, he said, okay, let's do it.
Yeah. That's so. I never told you. My Ian Rotten story.
Yeah. You never told me that.
So, do you ever remember hearing about the IWA Mid South tryout shows?
Yes. Those weren't going on. No, that was you.
I did one.
So don't you got to pay?
Yeah, to wrestle. You pay him $10 to let you wrestle and get judged by him and a couple other people on a panel.
And then what? Then you get
no,
you get
nothing.
Yeah.
It was just the opportunity to be seen by Ian Rotten and Mickey Knuckles.
Yeah, so I heard of this. I think I was on my way out with Ian. Like there was a time where he booked like everybody, and then he couldn't pay us because he couldn't draw. And then I think a lot of the Impact guys were like, our agent at the time was Bill Behrens, and he kind of pulled us all. And we're like, no, we're not doing business with you anymore. You still owe us a lot of money, kind of deal. But then after that, I did hear about these tryout shows, and I was like, oh, like it sucks for the wrestlers because it's backwards
so much.
But then at the same time, as a promoter, I'm like, oh, that is genius. That's a genius way to make money. I mean, I got to give it to Ian. I'm like, that's great. So, but sucks for the wrestlers, great for the promoter. Fans don't care. They get a great show. And wow. So you paid.
Yeah. I paid. So it was a really crummy situation. I have a whole YouTube video on my other channel. I'll show you. But me and a friend paid because it was in Midlothian, Illinois, Central Illinois. So for us, actually, it wasn't bad. It was like 2.5 hour car ride from Chicago here. And we heard about it, or some friend told us about it. And this is a classic "do not do this, kids" kind of thing. We were totally untrained at the time.
Yes, I heard about that too.
A lot of untrained. That would yep. It was a spot. The backyarders were a chance to get discovered and stuff like that. The one thing that kind of saved, we were working like lucha style. We were working right to right because we didn't know any better. We just were working all the right side. And the one thing that saved us though is that we did technically, I guess, we did. We messed around like in my backyard and like my trampoline and stuff like that. But we wanted to be like wrestlers so bad. And again, this is not a condoning, but that we didn't want to get hurt. So we weren't out there like, what's the dumbest, wildest thing we could do to put on a video? We were like, how do you pick someone up for a suplex and like both land so it minimally hurts? Like let's watch these guys. Like, look at how his feet fall and his arms fall at the same time. Like, we were literally those dorks. Like, rewind, go, rewind, go. Like, how does a suplex work? How does a hip toss work? Oh, he puts his hand there so he can rotate and flip up and all that stuff. So we kind of like, I thought we had a good grasp on it, and like it went okay. We didn't get gonged because they were gonging people at this one.
Oh,
if they thought you sucked enough, you got 5 minutes. Everybody got a 5-minute match, and if they hit a big gong and they thought you sucked, they just start hitting the gong and tell you to get out of the ring. And a couple people got gonged, and a couple people who supposedly been working, 2 to 4 years, had gotten gonged, and we got to finish, even though our match was a little funky and backwards. It was one of the weirdest, strangest, goofiest moments of my life, and I was never been more blown up doing nothing.
Yeah, so that's I'm just looking at the business side of it. Like, obviously this is ridiculous. You know, Ian probably puts 20 matches on the card, right? Which is times,
some of them were tag matches too. So I mean, that's $10 a guy. That a tag match is $40 right there.
Yep. So let's just say he made $400 to $500 just off the talent. Okay. He doesn't have to pay any trans, nothing. He gets ticket sales too, because people are going to buy tickets to go there. And then not only that, he probably puts it on DVD, and you yourself probably, he's not going to give you a copy of the DVD.
I bought it. Oh, 100%.
You're gonna buy it. Yep. You're going to buy it. And then other people are going to buy it, because even somebody like me would buy it. Cause I'd be like, oh, this is going to be horrible wrestling. I love watching horrible wrestling. I'm like, this is going to be great. And I'll buy it. And, oh man, I don't know how that's a great business. I
mean, he would do it too. Like on the week, it would piggyback it off. Like, so the next night was one of their IWA shows. So we just piggyback it. So the same building, he's not really, I don't think he'd probably get a ton of extra, especially in these tiny towns. He's not losing out a ton on the space and everything like that. The ring's already there for that show and everything. So yeah, it was a hell of a setup.
Well, I'm sure, like, so I've obviously done seminars and stuff, and I like to give constructive criticism, like, do the sandwich, like, oh, something good. Here's what was shitty. And then end it with something good, like that kind of thing. Sandwich the compliment, or the bad part. And I remember I did a seminar. I don't remember where, but I did it with Saban, and just what you described. We had him put together matches, and, everybody but like 2 guys were trained. 2 of them were clearly untrained. They were athletic and stuff, but they did everything on the right side. And their match was literally lock up. Like, one guy did 5 moves on the wrong side, and then the other guy just like kicked him to cut him off and did 5 moves on the other side. And me and Saban were just like, because we have to give feedback, right?
Yeah.
And I'm saying to Saban, I'm like, all right, so start with, and he just like cuts me off, and he's like, is this what you guys think wrestling is? Like, I've never seen Saban. Saban's the nicest guy, but he was just better. He's like, guys, this isn't wrestling. You don't just do 5 moves and then do 5 moves. I'm like, I don't even know where to begin. So we've done seminars like that. I've seen it, and hopefully it's a wake-up call that's saying like, hey, I need to get properly trained. And I'm sure you did the exact same thing, right?
Yep, absolutely. And that was like I said, it was weird, wild, and like I laugh at it looking back now, but but also it's like, yeah, that was kind of really, really dumb. But yeah, because it's amazing the things, I think, especially now being in the business for a while, that you take for granted, that it seems so simple to us now after years of putting matches together. Like, hey, how does it actually, this storytelling work? Even in the most 101 setting of like babyface, heel, shine, heat, comeback, like it feels so simple to us.
One
squirrel.
Louis, here he comes. Maybe he's thirsty for a little bit of whiskey.
We'll let him know. We'll get to it. But yeah, but no, it's funny how like it's even the simple match we take for like, I think sometimes I take for granted how, but like people who don't know better, they don't understand. There's so much more to it than just moves and doing stuff.
And that's just the first layer. And then you do all the indies, like even just at the last set of TVs, I'm not going to name any names, but one of the individuals, I said, okay, you had the first entrance, right? You have a minute for an entrance. And then unless it's part of your entrance, like you're taking off all your gimmicks and stuff. I'm like, don't do that. Wait till the if you're the second entrance, you got to do it, right? Because the camera's on you. But if you're just on your entrance, taking off your stuff in the middle of the ring, like being all awkward and stuff, I'm like, that's your time.
It's
like,
it's wasted time, baby. That's all you.
Wait till the next entrance goes, and then you could do whatever you want to take off your stuff. So it's a lot of the little things that you also have to learn once you get to that TV stage that you forget about, that you've never learned, like day one in wrestling, or when you were in wrestling school, because they don't really teach at regular schools like this is how cameras work, but everybody videotapes stuff now, so that's kind of getting more and more built in. But it's just the little things, like you said.
Yeah, it's wild. On that note, let's go ahead. Let's move on to sample B.
Which one's this? Oh, this one is a lot. The color is a lot lighter.
Okay.
I think. Oh yeah.
Noticeably so, but there isn't noticeable. Sometimes the lighting, depending on where you're holding it, can change.
Yeah, I guess it's all right.
But same kind of thing. Yeah, so give it a little smell. How is this one different from what you remember of that first one? You can now you have the glasses out there. You can go back if you need to.
Oh yeah. Oh, the first one smells a lot smokier, like a campfire.
Okay.
I'm getting that for whatever reason, but maybe this one doesn't have that. This one,
okay. So is that one? Is it more subtle? Again,
it's I want to say it's subtle. This one, wow, this one. I go back to this one.
Way bolder than you remember.
Yeah, man. It's like there was a fire in here or something like that. Some burning paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one, very, very mild smell, whatever it is. All right, I'm gonna take a sip.
Go ahead and get a little sip. See how this one again compares taste wise. Again, more of a punch of it. Is it stronger? Does it seem lighter?
This one stays in my throat a little bit more.
Okay. A little bit more lingering.
Yeah, I can still definitely feel it. I would say it's is it stronger?
Or like, again, sweeter, more spicy.
This one I feel is like a little bit more spicy. Maybe I'm totally wrong.
You can't be wrong when this is, it's all subjective.
Yeah. I feel like this one's a little bit stronger.
Okay.
To me, I would say this one's a little bit more. It's not as sweet as the other one. I don't know if it tastes like drier. Like maybe it just doesn't linger on my tongue as long.
Okay.
But I feel it in my throat more. So that's where maybe I'm getting the.
And dry is a thing. There can be a very drying. Sometimes like wine can be very dry. It kind of just dries out in your tongue really quick or whatever like that. That happens.
Yeah. So this one I feel like is that, and I don't. The taste in the mouth is already gone, but the throat, you can feel it burn. I'd say it's a little bit stronger.
Okay.
Let me see. Wow, I can't believe how smoky this one smells now. Like I didn't smell it at first.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing what sometimes even like that happens too. Like when it just sits out in the glass, especially after being encapsulated for a long time, the oxygen in the room can change it a little bit, or can at least, especially with aromas and everything like that, can kind of amplify them after it's gotten some oxygen on it a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of wild. But okay, so that's number 2. We'll get to number 3 in a moment. Again, same idea. Keep some of these thoughts in your head of like how these two compare as best you can. It'll never be perfect, but before we move on. But speaking of kind of like moving on, we heard a little bit about how you kind of got here, and you've touched on it a little bit. So I guess my main thing here for this portion of the broadcast is kind of like given things like the podcast, Wrestling Perspective podcast, and you branching into like producing and everything like that. What does like the future for Petey Williams, you think, in wrestling, in podcasting, whatever? What do you think like for you is the next kind of frontier as you keep moving forward?
Well, a lot of people, like in our positions and stuff like that, we want to do everything we can. And, like if you ask anybody, any wrestler that you'd be like, what are your goals in wrestling? They're going to say stuff like, well, I'd like to be world champion if they haven't been world champion before. Or I want to, main event this, or I want to, have this or whatever. I feel like I don't have wrestling goals anymore. Like a lot of my stuff is producing and stuff. And, to me, like being like running Impact one day, being Scott D'Amore's job, I'm like, that is a long-term goal of myself for me, so something like that. Like obviously producing, I had little goals. Like when I started doing the producing stuff, I'm like, working, the producers sit right at the gorilla now. Before they used to be in the truck when I started doing it. And I would sit right behind the main producer, who right now is Josh Matthews, that kind of runs the show and replays all that kind of stuff. And then the director, who's Dave Sahadi, who he's calling all the camera shots and whatever the case may be. So watching them, I mean, I'm like, man, that'd be a good goal. I'd love. I feel like it's a thankless job because if you mess up, it's on you. If you press the wrong button, but still, I'm like, just my vision to be able to be like, yeah, this is how it's going to look and stuff. And I've worked for several producers like Sahadi, Andrew Thomas, one more, Michael Vetter, and they all do it a little bit differently, like how they catch the top rope, like something off the top rope, how they zoom in, their entrances and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, that'd be awesome if I could put my spin on it. So like, obviously backstage, that's my goal. I always throw out there like a short-term goal for me. It was like, I've always wanted this ever since like Adam Cole has been doing the Canadian Destroyer. I'm like, dude, why has nobody ever booked us against each other? Like, I know like he's, like a superstar and stuff like that. I'm on like, mid card, like just kind of, being a fill-in for stuff like that. But I'm like, dude, it's like, whatever. We could have a 2-minute match and you could beat me with a destroyer, but I'm like, it would still be something. It'd be, I don't know, like not a passing of the torch, but something like, yeah, you that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't think I'll do anything else in wrestling that's going to top like, me bringing the Canadian Destroyer to the mainstream and have it be on TV every single week, multiple companies and all that kind of stuff. It can't. Like I'm content with like, okay, when 100 years from now, when all of us are dead, wrestling's still going to be going on. It's going to be, and there's going to be a bunch of kids doing it that are not even born yet or whatever the case may be. And there'll be Canadian Destroyers. It's just, that's what's going to happen. So I could say like, yeah, man, I left my fingerprints on wrestling. I'm pretty proud of that. And not everybody could say that. So I'm very content with what I've done in my wrestling career so far. And I want to be able to do it and help other people along the way. Like I love, when, for example, the big Kenny Omega Rich Swann match that happened and Mauro Ranallo was calling it, Scott put me in charge as being the producer for that match. And I'm like, oh, this is an honor. Like this is like the biggest match in the company's history, probably. And just to be able to be like, yeah, what if you guys did that? And just having my part in it. And then even working with Mauro, it was awesome because he's like, hey, Petey, what do you think of this? Ask it. I don't do commentary. I'm like, he should be asking you this shit. You know what I mean? But he's like, what about this for the outline? Okay, what's the story? And we're all sitting down and it's just, that stuff's awesome for me because I'm not the most athletic guy. I'll tell you that right now.
Says the guy who invented the Canadian.
It's not though. It's not. But like a Rich Swann, I could be like, hey, Rich, I like that spot that you called and stuff like that, the combination. But what if you did this? Because if I had his ability, that's the shit I'd be doing right now. You know what I mean? And he's like, oh, that's good. I love doing that stuff. It's stuff that I can't do myself, but I can envision somebody else doing it and giving them the idea and then having them do it. Like, I feel proud. I just feel good when I get to do stuff like that. So back to your question, long-term goal, stuff like that, running the company one day or running my own company. Saban and I were, you might have overheard us talking at the last set of tapings. We said, hey man, we should start our own wrestling company. And we're like, yeah, maybe we should. Cause we're both like from the Michigan area and stuff. Mm-hmm. And we're like, yeah. And we're starting to talk about advertise. Like we're totally just out of the blue saying this stuff. And we're like, yeah, how do we get sponsors and stuff like that? And then Stamora ended up walking by, and I'm like, hey man, do you remember for sponsor? And he immediately butted himself in. He's like, yeah, what we would need to do is, and I'm like, did he just become part of our new wrestling company? I'm like, he just totally inserted himself. So yeah, I mean, the sky's the limit. There's so much I still want to do in wrestling, maybe not in the ring. But you know, outside the ring, I got some ideas.
Nice. That's awesome. And like I love the way you put that too, because that's something, and without sounding like condescending, hopefully to young people out there or something. But I'm like, I just feel like it's it's kind of a maturity thing a little bit, just in life in general, when like, especially in wrestling, because wrestling can be so centered around self-centered goals and everything like that, very individual. And like I've done a lot of the broadcasting side of it, and I really like the idea of like, rather than just being like, oh, how can I win? How can I be a bigger star? How can I be on top? It's like, how can I enhance this situation here? I don't even have to be like in there. Like, how can I make this better? And it's really rewarding in a way that maybe I probably, we probably didn't understand when we were 20, when you're 21.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it just comes with time served in whatever business you're in, or like I said, just kind of maturity as a human. But yeah, there's something really, really cool about just being able to softly kind of have your hands on something and then let it be the creation that it ends up turning into, which I think, yeah, is very, very cool.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that stuff. Like, and the thing is, like when people watch it on TV, they just see all the superstars that are on TV, but they don't like they know there's a lot of stuff, production, and even like the guys holding the camera and stuff. Like everybody has a very important role to play to make the finished product that the people see, come off the way it does. And it's kind of like a little bit of a thankless job. I mean, yeah, you get a paycheck, but the people, all the superstars, like the actors and stuff, the same thing in movies, right? All the actors get all the credit. Oh, he wins an Oscar and that's the biggest one or whatever. But look at the director that like directed all that stuff, or even the lighting guy or
cinematographer,
exactly,
stuff like that. Yeah, editors.
Yeah, but still, and I mean, I think it comes to a point. It's like, and when you do get older, you're like, I'm not gonna be able to wrestle forever, but you also want to be a part of that business and that industry that you love so much, that you grew up loving, and you just want to be able to continue with that and pass along the knowledge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what a great spot. Final note. Let's go ahead. Let's close this out with our final sample. Sample C. The triumphant conclusion. Same.
Now, what if I mixed all these together and just drank?
I mean, once we're off the air, these are yours. These are yours to do what you with. That's 3 full well, that's like 6 to 8 ounces of whiskey. You'll have a good night. Let's put it that way. So yeah, the same kind of thing. How's this one comparatively?
All right.
Anything jump out at you initially?
No, and I don't know why.
Okay.
Now, why does this one taste smoky now?
What, number 2? Or
yeah,
letter B?
Maybe it's man. I don't.
But one still is like the most smoky.
That's really
overall.
Weird. Yeah, the first one definitely.
Okay.
It's got to be something with the because they've been airtight.
They've been sitting here. Yeah, they were there. They were closed up for a while.
All right, so let me taste it.
Give it a little sip.
I don't feel like this one's as strong as number 2.
Okay. Sweeter, spicier, more
not
bold,
as spicier. I would say
subtle.
I would say this one is definitely sweeter. Like I could still taste it on my tongue. It's not as strong. I would say number 2 is the strongest when I first drank it. This one's probably the letter C is the weakest, but I would say definitely the sweetest.
Okay. And again, so think about too, like long lingering finish. Is it pretty quick?
This is a quicker one. I would say.
Okay.
Okay, so B was, I would say, drier. This one's a little bit more wet, if that's a thing.
Sure. Yeah.
This one I could taste the sweetness on my lips and tongue longer. This one doesn't burn as we're talking about C right now. This one doesn't burn as much. I would say B is the strongest. Strongest, but the taste went away really quick.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say my favorite. Man, this is
You start thinking about that. That was gonna lead into the next one. Our final thing is you rank A, B, and C from favorite to least favorite. If you had to pick one of these to like sip on for a night on its own.
Okay. Now that this one has aged and it's been out for like a half hour, let me see if it tastes different.
Yeah, little final comparisons.
I don't know about A.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Rinse up my mouth, some water. B.
I appreciate the
I
work
like
going
that
into this.
I like the A. I like the taste of A, whatever the taste is.
Okay.
Better than B.
Okay.
B's just I feel like B's probably gonna be my least favorite one. I feel like it.
One more sip of C.
Okay. I would say if I had to, man, not B. I'm eliminating B right now.
Okay, B's last.
Yeah, that's rank number 3.
Between A and C for our favorite.
I would say C is probably my favorite. It tastes probably because I like Bullet so much. It tastes the most like Bullet. I could be totally wrong. I'd be like, hey, Pete, B's Bullet. Like, fuck you. Like,
yeah.
So I would say, number 1 is C.
Okay.
Then
C, A, then B.
C,
so
A, then B. Yeah.
Okay.
So wow, cab. All right. So I'm interested to know now, like, what are these? What is the, like, the spices or the whatever, to see how off I was, because to me they taste like whiskey.
Yes.
If you were to ask me like, hey, is that whiskey? I'd be like, yep, that is whiskey.
Well, it is whiskey. So you did identify that.
Yes.
But so what these are is I try to come up with a theme. Sometimes it relates like to the person. Sometimes it's just kind of like a theme in general. So I did have a theme with you. I remember telling you, I just don't have a bunch of Canadian whiskeys. I wanted to do like a Canadian show, but I don't have a bunch of Canadian whiskey. But so what I did instead was Canadian whiskey traditionally usually is a rye based whiskey. So the primary grain is usually rye. That's what Canadian whiskeys are generally known for, different blends and things like that. So what we have here is all rye whiskeys, rye not. You know what I mean?
Right on.
And so these are all different, but they're different versions of rye, different like ways you can do a rye whiskey instead of just like the standard way. So we'll work backwards from the least favorite, which was letter B.
Yeah.
This one is called Rossville Union Straight Rye Whiskey. So this is from Indiana.
Okay.
And this, I believe, does it tell us exactly what the mash bill? It doesn't. Now, this is about a 4-year-old whiskey, and this is actually the lightest of all of them. This is the lowest proof out of the 3 of them that you had today.
Maybe that's why where the dry is coming in, it feels like it's not, like I don't feel it on my tongue, like it's gone. So maybe that's where I feel like it's the weakest.
Could be it's a little younger, it's a little lighter. It's not too much lighter. 94 proof, 47% ABV. I'm gonna get roasted in the comments section if I'm wrong. So this distillery is known for its rye production. It's known for very high rye, like 100% rye or 95%. Okay. But this version, I'm pretty sure. Nope, I take it back. I had to taste to be sure. This is pretty close to 95.5. rye. So it's mostly rye with a little bit of malted barley in there. There's no corn like there is with bourbon, nothing like that. So rye is generally a spicy, viewed as a spicy, herbally grain. But what I do find with this one, I kind of agree with you. I'm like, it's nice, but everything's very mild in this.
Okay.
Generally speaking, to me, the flavor and all that stuff.
Is it sugar? I don't know. It tastes sweeter than the other ones.
So that's what I think. It's mild but sweet. There's less of that herbal and spice. There is no sugar in any of these. Not in here. There's nothing added to any of these. Most whiskeys, there's nothing added. No flavoring, no coloring, no sugar, no nothing.
Okay.
Once you do that, it's no longer whiskey. It has to be called flavored whiskey or a specialty drink or something. So I feel, even though all of these in theory are made in a very similar fashion, where they're made and how they do that makes the difference. So that's a 95.5 rye from Indiana. Letter A, your first one, is empty because I finished it the other day, but is New Riff straight rye whiskey.
Okay.
So this is a little bit stronger. This is 100 proof. So this is 50% ABV. This is also 95% rye. So 95 and then 5% malted barley. This distillery in particular, they make a really good bourbon, but I think they're going to be known for their rye, and their owner has said as much. So I find when you went back and were like, it's like a campfire, I kept wanting to like lead you there, but it's not. So I don't get campfire, but maybe this will influence you more. I get like pine needle and mint when I get this.
Yeah,
I do get very much pine needle-y, like a forest. I don't get the fire, but I get the forest.
Yes, maybe I could see that.
But again, there is no wrong. But I'm like, it's just when you came back and get, I was like, yes, he's starting to get those. That's that sense that I get, and this is so this one to me especially is much more. Even though again, 95% rye. 95% rye.
Okay.
But this one is much more like, is that the kind of like grassy, piney, smoky-ish notes, whereas this one is a little bit more just kind of regular whiskey tasting, little bit of, it just seems a little bit more middle of the road to me.
Yeah. Awesome.
And then your favorite, which I'm very glad too, because it would kind of be how I rank these as well. This would be my favorite out of the bunch, no doubt. Same distillery. It's New Riff. But what they did with this one is 100% rye. So there's nothing else in here other than rye grain, and it's malted. So this is 100% malted rye. It's a little bit older too. These both are 4 years. This is 6 years old. 100 proof again. But they malt the rye before they distill it. So malted rye, it's funny the way it all works out, because generally speaking, it gives you a little bit like this rounder, sweeter, bolder note. It's kind of, I always rounded around the edges. It's not very harsh. It's kind of sweet, chocolatey, kind of caramelly, a little bit more so than rye usually, especially 100% rye. This should be very spicy, and it's not. I think it's a little bit kind of sweeter. It's a little bit almost like, I almost like milkshakey. That's why there's a little bit of those notes.
Yeah.
So the funny thing about it is, and this happens to me anytime I hear the word malted when it comes to grains. Because I always think malt, when I hear malt, I think of like when I was a kid and you get a chocolate malt or like a malt ball or something like that. You think of candy. And so my brain influences me a little bit that this tastes sweeter like that. When in reality, especially with whiskey, when you malt the grain, literally malting something, it's not, I always thought it was like cooking it with like cocoa or something. No, malting literally means taking the grain and putting it in water. And you let it, and it sprouts. And that's the malting process. So normally grain, they just take it, they mash it down, and they cook it in their big thing, and then they pipe it through a still and everything like that. But when you malt it, you let the grain alone sit in water for like, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Like, I'm not sure if it's days or just hours or whatever. And it sprouts, and it kind of opens up these other pores inside the grain, and then you start doing the other process, like an extra step. But it affects the flavor. So that's why, like, scotches, you always hear like single malt or blended malt, because that's a very common. They malt all their stuff pretty much. They use malted rye. So, but in doing so, I think they create a very nice, a little bit more delicate and sweet version of their rye. Even though it should be way spicier and everything than these other ones, I find it really, really enjoyable. And that's like kind of a fancy limited edition. So you got something kind of a cool fancy one. So
How would you rank these? I ranked it
Same thing.
CAB. Oh, okay.
that's what I was saying. Yeah, I'm like, it made me happy because that's pretty much how I would do it too. I really like the piney smokiness of this one, but I think the that special edition, it has a little extra layer of just like really well-rounded sweetness. And I am generally more of a bourbon guy anyway, and this is a little bit more sweet and caramelly like bourbon to me than the ryes are. So yeah, I would do the same thing.
You know what I would do? So it seems like they smell a little bit different. Like when I was popping them open and pouring them, I missed all the smells. I feel like maybe if like, we're like half hour before the show, pop everything open and just let them sit. I think that would be something. If I was producing your show,
hey, you're the producer, man. You got the experience. That's literally a very good idea.
The smells are just like because they're sitting in my glasses at single glasses, and man,
it changes over over 30, 40 minutes.
So I could smell the difference in them, definitely.
Yeah.
Now, but
that's a good idea. I might start telling the future guests. I'll have to like, hey, if you can, like 20 minutes or something before we start, just pour them into glasses and let them sit. It's a good idea.
Absolutely.
Hell yeah. Well, no, Petey, thank you very much for taking the time. I very much appreciate it. Usually before we go, usual podcast mumbo jumbo. Tell people about the stuff you're doing, where they can find you, etc.
Well, obviously right now, every Thursday night on Impact Wrestling, both of us for that matter, side projects. We got, you can find me on Twitter at Petey Williams, Instagram, if it's back up now. I know it was down for a little bit at Petey Williams. And then, I got a podcast myself. We're on every platform you could possibly think of. I think also on the StreamYard as well. That's one we use. But it's called The Wrestling Perspective. You can subscribe, all that kind of stuff, YouTube, wherever you find your podcast. And the guys we do it with, we talk wrestling, guys like yourself, Matt. We had you on the show. Awesome. You were a phenomenal guest. We loved you so much. But guys we do it with is Dennis Farrell. He's our main producer, host guy. And then Lars Fredrickson from the band Rancid. He's starting to become mainstream again. He just got, he was on tour and stuff. And then Ruby Riot, she was on our podcast. She switched her name with Lars' approval from the band Rancid to Ruby Soho. She's on AEW now, coming out to the song and all that kind of stuff. Lars is rolling in the money again. And then Dimitri Young, formerly from St. Louis Cardinals, Detroit Tigers, former Major League Baseball player, and then Darren McCarty from 4-time Stanley Cup winner from the Red Wings. It's kind of like a crapshoot of who shows up since we have so many people. It's you've been on the podcast. It's kind of weird. It's like we have a formula and format just like you have one here, but we love it. You can find us on Fight TV as well. That airs on Fridays at 8:00. But that's what I'm doing right now. So watch, enjoy, listen. Yeah.
Hell yeah. No, and that's awesome. So check out Petey everywhere. Check us out, yes, every single Thursday. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining us on another episode of Straight Shooting. Always open your mind, always expand your palate, open your, thought process to something new, something maybe you haven't tried before. It's always important. You never know what you might discover. And always, always, always be wrestling with whiskey. Until the next one, cheers, everybody.
Cheers.